Me and James will just stand here.
It's this good issue.
It's that bit.
No, it's not.
No.
The angle of the.
Most of the blinds are on the floor, so I think we'll probably have to give up.
It's okay. There's enough of us. I can rely on contributions from the left side. Sorry for the distraction, everyone. I've got to make sure I don't miss anyone. Let's move on to the Controlled Drugs Accountable Officer Annual Report. Jim, please.
Thanks, Chair. So there's reports here from Love and from Liverpool Women's. The annual CD report is a statutory requirement. And our director for the Accountable Officer for Controlled Drugs is Roberts, who is our chief pharmacist, or the chief pharmacist of these two trusts. She discharges that duty on behalf of the chief executive. For me, the narrative in these annual reports really takes us back to probably 2022, when we started our transformation plan to address the issues identified by the CQC and by NHS England. And what you'll see in these, as I think you see in a lot of these reports, is first the scale of the challenge across the organisation, but also the work that's been done to understand the situation that we find ourselves in, to be situationally aware of risks and to progressively address those issues as we see them. And the chief pharmacist and her team have worked steadfastly, I think, to identify these. You see a lot of risks still identified in the appendices. That's the way that I think those teams function. Identify the risks, have addressed them, and you'll see in both papers for the left and the women's actually investment over the last year to help address the risks and move things forward. In addition to prescribing controlled drugs, we actually are a supplier to other institutions through our pharmacy, through our sterile unit. So there's a different set of licensing and controls required in there. And of course, what that means actually is there's quite a lot of external scrutiny. So the paper will talk about NIA looking internally, but in fact, external regulators come and have a look if you are a wholesaler. We've had that scrutiny, which is helpful. Every quarter, there is a local intelligence network, so that's part of how the Home Office discharges its duties and responsibilities in respect of controlled drugs, and we play into that. Of course, we do, with a quarterly result, which is a lot of this information which is presented. I gain reassurance and assurance from the fact that the CQC have been in quite a lot in the early part, and indeed this is the report for 24-25, so this was essentially the CQC will with us in Q4 24-25, looking at both well-led, where the chief pharmacist and quite a lot of her team were interviewed by the CQC, but also when they looked at clinical services at both Aintree and the Royal, and indeed that's always part of their inspection regime. So we've had a good look at this. And I think what the papers say is there are still some quite big issues here. There's still issues around storage, for example, in certain areas. There's issues about transportation of CVs. There's reference to some disciplinary activities and indeed 2 members of staff being dismissed as a consequence of demonstrable breaches of the CV regs. So there's a lot still to do, but a lot of, I think, good governance, good activity in that space.
Thank you. Reports, any concerns, points, questions? Yeah. Thank you, Jim. We see those reports. Going on to the bigger medical man. Medicine management annual.
Thanks, Chair. Well, let me give you some more numbers. So, of course, medicine spend, that's about 10% of the whole budget. So we're talking about 110, 120 million pounds a year. And about 12 million doses of medication being delivered across the course of the year. So we're talking about big numbers of activity. That's the first thing. Again, this pulls across, I believe, what we've done in the last few years to make sure that our governance structures work for medicine safety. Of course, back in 2022-23, we had the medicine safety improvement plan. We're now coming to the third iteration of that plan. It's been constantly revised and sits slightly in a different place, but nevertheless it exists and is managed through DTC now. So the papers show the governance structures that are in place. They show how the chief pharmacist team oversees these issues, bringing new medications in, making sure the formula is being managed, and so forth. And the paper talks about the distinction between delivery site and governance, which is overseen pseudo-central arrangement through DTC. And I think the paper has acknowledged investment in capacity and how that has been carefully thought through and managed in context of other priorities, but there is demonstrable increased capacity in medicines management. I believe the paper showed that's made a difference. And again, I point to the fact that a lot of this has been looked at by external regulators over the course of time. There's nice reference to developments in digital, which have been very important in making our systems safer, and particularly, I think, the fact that EPMA now exists up to EDs is a very important development. It's been, in my experience, quite difficult to get electronic prescribing into EDs in acute hospitals. There's a certain amount of resistance because of how patients flow through the systems and so on. But of course, once you get it in, then you avoid one other set of duplication, which creates a whole series of handoffs and risks. So I think that's great in this report. And the fact that automated drug cabinets are progressively being introduced, so make the system safer because they're secure, they require identification to pull drugs out, and there's a very robust audit trail. So in our EDs, for example, the Pyxis machines is a very important development. I think if money was no object, we would put them in everywhere, but there's a balance to be struck. Outpatient antimicrobial therapy. So this is another piece important of patient flow. This is about getting patients who require intravenous therapies into a position where they can have those at home. Now, the 24-25 report shows a real great progress in that space, and that was supported to some extent by investment from the ICB. And of course, we hope we would build on that because it supports Pete and teams, particularly in terms of flow. I'm sorry to report that actually in this financial year, the ICB funding to OPAP has diminished, and therefore that service has diminished. So it's not in this report because this is about last year, but it's a disappointing retrograde step, in my view, about where if we're trying to upstream services and move services out of hospital, etc., that's a very demonstrable example of how we can do that if we put the resources in the right place. And we've probably gone backwards in that space, quite frankly. We do pretty well, I think, in terms of making the IV to oral switches in terms of antimicrobial stewardship. That's something we paid quite a lot of attention to in 23-24. I'd have to say I've taken my foot off that bit of the gas, but I think we can see that that's maintained in terms of IV to oral. And that's an important, it's one of those quality markers that is seen nationally, actually, but at the moment isn't reported back, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is. So it's helpful to know that we're doing okay in that space. So, Chair and colleagues, I think these papers show the scale. They show an understanding of where we are. There are loads of risks shown in these papers, which I think, again, is how our chief pharmacist operates, but allows clear visibility of where she and her team see the challenges and how to work those.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to make a couple of points, really. I think from a digital perspective, I think should note the appointment of our Chief Clinical Officer for Pharmacy and Medicine has been key success. Sarah Simpson's played a significant role in developing our digital maturity and having a key part in terms of our EPR procurement as well around EPNA and medicines management. The second point is data is critical in terms of how we respond in a timely way to incidents. I think the bit I'd like to pull out is we had the visit by Rahul Singhal, who's the National Chief Pharmacy and Medicines Information Officer. I was really impressed by the way the team are doing around our technical medicines dashboard, which I think is quite unique in terms of what we've got within the NHS. But it was was really helpful as a good example. I thought things use, I think it's worth pulling out.
That's really good. It is. You've got Mike then, that's all.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. I think this applies to both reports, the distance management control drugs. I'm going to ask you to put yourself in my shoes for a minute. Lovely shoes to be in. We were in a really challenged position a bit ago, and we're in significantly improved and improving position. We've had a degree of external scrutiny, which has been helpful in that. And that external scrutiny is reducing as confidence increases. I think my question is, as a board, we weren't aware of where we were 2 or 3 years ago. And these aren't areas that easily lend themselves to walkabouts and that kind of operational understanding. So from a kind of non-executive point of view, what should we be looking for now to say, are we in danger of slipping back to where we were in terms of that uninformed view, or just taking what somebody said as read? How do we make sure that we're giving this appropriate scrutiny given the nature of that subject?
Thank you for the question, Mark. I think I would reflect from a kind of general medical perspective. Perhaps this has come up in ARC before, that we tend to focus on some other areas of risk. The way we see this from a medical perspective is the groups that are described in this report come up to the quality standards David and I co-chair, and we then take assurance piece to executive. And if we're seeing big risks in that space, of course, they will come to ARC. So we do have that system of escalating. It wouldn't be particularly difficult to bring more information to ARC on a regular basis. That's the kind of assurance that non-executive colleagues are seeking. But otherwise, the assurance is coming from the way we escalate risks and how we discuss them through that process, I think.
And Natalie, then Jackie, please.
It was just picking up on what Jim shared around the OPAT service. So that was one of the key recommendations when Newton came in and did the diagnostic around patients remaining in hospital. We got on Monday a national call with NHS to review our discharge position and progress, and their key line of inquiry is asking around what is our OPAT capacity and what is our plan to increase it. That meeting's got ICB colleagues and place colleagues on it, so I'm hopeful that we can then start having the conversation around how we can expand that going forward. So hopefully we can improve it.
Jackie.
And it's just to respond a bit to Mike to say that I have done walk round in the 2 pharmacies of Carlton Cheston here on Aintree side. So seeing that and I've seen some of the challenges they've got with respect to the estate and everything, and Beth and I had a conversation about that. So I think we can get out there and we can have a look. And I suppose when you're used to looking at this data, it makes it easier. And if you're not, then it's quite difficult, isn't it? I suppose the question for me, Jim, is really around patients on controlled drugs. It's a problem across the NHS wider. We encourage patients to bring in all their medications so we can see what they've got, and then we don't always manage them in the same way. So, there's not been assurance of both women's or at Loft around this. So could you talk a little bit more about what we're doing about that? I could see something around training, but I just think for me, it's part of regulatory standards for nurses, and they're normally the ones that are in charge of them. What we're doing and why we're not getting the message right.
Thank you. So there's a lot in this. So first of all, there's the whole piece about storage, isn't there? Having the facilities available so that patients who do choose to bring their own CDs can store them safely. And if you go back to 2022, we were very clear that those facilities simply did not exist. So we were starting from a very low base. So gradually, first of all, there's been the investment in facilities to enable it to happen. And then, of course, there's a bit about establishing the policies, the SOPs, to say this is how we behave. And then there's the training piece, then there's the implementation piece, and then there's the audit to make sure that we're doing what we said we would do. And what you see in these papers is that all of that is ongoing. I think by and large, the storage issue is now solved. And in some areas, we can do that robustly and reliably. And so it's a continuous work in progress now. It's not using the audit cycle to continue to improve. And in all of that, you see very high levels of incident reporting. you see that sometimes we probably feel that patients themselves are not making this easy for our colleagues. And therefore, you see incidents being reported in that way. Somebody's gone outside and taken something else, or that sort of stuff. So I think this is quite challenging, isn't it, for particularly our nursing colleagues. But there is an emphasis on it, and progressive improvement cycle.
But Daniel,
Just picking up on Mike's issue, obviously last year following those issues, the internal audit program looked at two different things, which was about controlled drugs and medicines delivery. So whilst the audit committees reviewed those reports, those recommendations that still need to be implemented, and we're also looking at the design of the 26-27 audit plan across the three organisations within the group to consider how do we actually look at some of the standardisation that we can use our internal auditors to assess the robustness of those arrangements. So that's one of the other arrangements that we can actually see, are the issues continuing to improve and are there any gaps?
thank you. Okay, good report again, thank you. And as Mike says, we go back 2 years, and in terms of the improvement plan, the looked improvement plan at that time, this was red rated on a month-by-month basis. It was relatively new at that stage, Jim, and there was a huge agenda for her to address. But yes, there's still a lot more to do. Yes, there's recommendations to implement, but a huge amount. And please pass on the recognition of all of that to the team involved. Really impressive program. Keep in mind the staff story we heard earlier, organ and tissue donation annual reporting.
Thanks, Jay. And nice to build on that report on that presentation from earlier on. This is a requirement for the team to produce an annual report which shows the activity. And John Bryson made clear to us, didn't he, that the organ donation and transfusion service has categorised that in a particular area, expecting particular levels of activity, and we are meeting those levels of activity. I don't sense there's any pressure from the national team for us to change that status. I think that's probably sensible as our activities return to pre-COVID levels now, and it appears to be robust and reliable. And as I've shown perhaps in our learning from deaths report, our mortality stats are stable, so we've reached some kind of stable, steady state. Sue asked a question about innovations, and I thought John would talk about orbital harvests, which is referenced in the paper. So this is a way of removing eyes of patients who passed away. And the particular specialist area in Liverpool is that in that harvest, the eyes are either harvested for transplant, but if they're deemed unsuitable for transplant, and that's often because the patient has a history of some transmissible disease or dementia, and then they are harvested to biobank for research. And that means that Liverpool will produce very fresh material, which is essential to the research program. So, and what John's talking about in the paper which he wrote is that the national team wants to invest more in how we do that, which mostly will be spent on nursing colleagues being able to counsel families. So 2 more of the specialist nurses who put the presentation together to give us more capacity to do that, which I think will be a wonderful thing. There's obviously quite a lot of sensitivities, of course, about harvesting any organs in this space that needs to be handled. So I think that's the innovation perhaps that you were asking about. In terms of us transplanting as an organisation, then kidneys are the main piece, and you see the numbers in there. We're back to pre-COVID levels again. I probably James and I inquired early on in our time as to whether we had any aspirations to move into other transplant programs, for example, liver. And I think it's pretty clear to say we do not. But there is SpecCom don't require that. There is adequate provision across the country. We've got very good relationships with Leeds and Birmingham terms of liver transplant programs, and our teams want to keep it that way. So what I hope you see is that we've got the governance in place for these programs. We've got the specialist staff in place to work with families to ensure that we can harvest organs correctly and get them to the right place. The relationship with the Leeds limb transplant service is evolving, and 2 more have been done this report. So I think it's a strong picture of the structure that we will maintain and build on these relationships develop.
Thank you. Going to question. So, to receive the. Thank you. Right. Really good suite of papers around quality safety, good discussions around them here. We move into people now. Do you have the first place on the group culture update?
Thank you, Chair. So this paper is our 6 months, primarily our 6 months look back of what we've done over the last 6 months as a group. But we've also done a nod to the high level forward view and highlighted some areas of positive action, which sort of dovetails with Tim's earlier paper, looking at, you know, what we're doing in culture in terms of the short, medium and long term. I think what the paper does do, it demonstrates an increasing alignment between the 3 organisations within group. And you can see in the paper the activity across those 3 organisations, so 4 sites really. There is a common focus within each of the organisations, focus on compassionate and inclusive leadership. Again, things that we've discussed today around the intelligence survey and sickness as to the importance of leadership, compassionate leadership within our organisations. Focuses on wellbeing and inclusion and improving psychological safety. And they were common themes across the 3. The paper sets out the context. It looks at the national, the regional and the local context. And it looks ahead, thinking about how can we actually align our culture programme to the national context, which is the 10-year workforce plan that was due by autumn. It is now in spring, so that actually starts to help us for the next 6 months in terms of the alignment of that. Also the alignment to our group 2030 strategy, which is a key element of the next 6 months. I won't go into this detail, but the paper sets out the impact that we've had across the sites. We try to focus on not just the inputs, but, you know, what are we seeing? What's the difference we're actually seeing within each of those sites as a result of the focus for the last 6 months. Going forward, the development of the people in OD target operating model, we've already started to look at where are the priority areas that we need to focus on for the next sort of 3 to 5 years. But in the paper, you'll see that actually we're proposing that already there are 5 focus areas, areas that we want to focus on that fit with all those within those strategic priorities. And then within that, we're proposing that there are 3 areas of positive action, which are around prioritising colleague safety, wellbeing, inclusion, creating consistent leadership behaviour and culture. And that links to a paper later on in part 2 of the agenda in terms of how we prepare our future leaders in terms of their capability and leadership behaviour. And then actually connecting really building on the advantage of being in a group, which is around the opportunity for learning and that improvement culture. There are risks to the delivery of our future plan, not least we've talked about already this morning, which are the operational pressures that we face, the engagement of our leadership teams going through transformational change, and the fatigue of staff that we see on a day-to-day basis. We're also, you know, assessing across the 3 organisations. There's clearly different cultural maturity going on. You know, there's some great practice. As you know, Liverpool Heart and Chest being the first in the country with the staff survey results for last year, there's clearly a lot of work that we need to embrace as a group into, you know, and share that learning. So I'll leave it there, Chair, but that's a counted through the last 6 months and then on to the next 6 months.
Thank you. All good. Now, in the action required of the Board of Directors, in this paper, we variously asked to receive, support, endorse or agree different aspects of the paper. But rather than try and break all that down and have separate discussions, I'll ask in the discussion or in any questions, if anyone by exception has a problem with any of those things that we're being asked to do. Like to go. Everyone content? Jeffrey, you content? Jackie? Order? Sue? David? Mike? I don't know if it's the sun or I'm trying to interpret the slide.
I think it's a really good paper. It's really strong on actions. It's just, it's weak on outcomes. And I think it's quite hard to know. In section 3.3, all good actions. How will we know in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months time whether we've done these things or not? Rather than saying, we did them and these happen to be the outcomes. What are the intended outcomes of these and how we can track those through? And if we could close that loop, so that was why I was kind of.
Okay, Sarah, you can. Thank you.
So the plan around that, sorry, think about that. So the plan around that is that the people plans that we will develop will there'll be an overarching people plan, but be people plans that will sit at the different sites, and they will have KPIs attached to them to actually indicate whether they're delivering what they should be or not. The other area that we're going to look at is, which started to develop last year, is actually a proper dashboard for OD. We don't see that in the board in terms of some of those learning outcomes that we want to see. So in the paper, it describes the development of KPIs and the development of a dashboard, which will build into the back end of the 2030 strategy in that moment.
Okay, thank you. So all of those things that we're asked to do come into content with Heather.
Thank you.
That's good. Right. A 2025 annual self-assessment placement providers data.
Thank you very much, Chair. So that again, the pack contains 3 submissions or the proposed submissions from the different organisations, and so I'll just do a summary of those. This is just to ensure that we're in alignment with the National Education Quality Framework, that we form a self-assessment review to evaluate the extent to which the educational standards are met. And obviously we do that to ensure that we are able to consider the best practice for continuous quality improvement within providing a good learning environment. There is a request that the Board of Directors gives agreement that we can make that submission for each of the 3 organisations, and that submission is due today. There are some issues around some highlighted areas for continued improvements, and that is right, and that's the whole idea of us looking at our own work and understanding our assessments. Some of this is around issues that I think we've highlighted earlier today around some of the profession and issues the organisation's been feeling around, particularly around recruitment and how we manage some of those organisational structural changes, and how that has diverted some of the support for placement provision. The increased workloads around cross-cover arrangements, some of that's around recruitment, some of that is around staff absence, but also around some of the way in which services have changed, and we need to recognise that in the placement capacity, and that tends to be in those smaller departments. The time it takes sometimes to deliver the improvement initiatives that were set out last year. I just want to give a clarification to the penultimate bullet point. It is right and proper that people are able to make requests for reasonable adjustments. And the issue here, I believe, is that the trusts need to be more agile in making responses to those rather than the number that are coming through. I recognise that that's clumsily written. And then obviously a point which I think is picked up in the paper that was earlier on around the 10-point plan for resident medics around how to support those with their supervision. So all that taken into account, we've got a plan for each of the organisations within the group. Some of those will be a collective learning and collective actions. Some of them will just be nuanced for particular services, but there is a plan to do that. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, David. Jackie, can I come to you first?
Thank you for the papers and thank you for that clarification, because that was my question around reasonable adjustment. I suppose the thing is, and what you don't quite see here is that real partnership working with HEIs. You know, obviously we've got to do stuff and we've got to have those meetings to discuss both students and placement areas. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship?
Yes, by all means. So this paper was really to just give information on the self-assessment document rather than that greater detail around the so what and the how. The organisations do have relationships with the universities and other stakeholder organisations about the learner experience, some of the way in which we work together or could work better together. From a provider organisation as well as the universities, and then how we both react to changes from regulators and how they change some of the ground that we need to work on as well. So we have very regular meetings from frontline clinicians who are responsible for education within our organisations with HEIs, and we come together for our own improvement plans. That are managed at site and a joint improvement working relationship with HEIs.
I asked that question because our council of governors appointed members often ask about this relationship and talk about it at the meeting. So I think it's just really important to capture it here as well.
And those working relationships discuss all sorts of issues. So it's not simply around the provision or the quality of the placements. It can be how the provider organisations can support the HEIs in delivering some learning experiences within the university context rather than just within placements. And we can support the teaching and the lecturing staff in supporting their knowledge around more contemporaneous clinical experience.
Other point, David?
Thank you. It's a really clear report, David. Thank you. Just a bit, and it might be what you referred to as your clumsy wording, but when I read it, 2 of the 3 reports talk about us needing to get external assistance for assessing those reasonable adjustment requests coming in. How would that assistance, what form would it take, and how do we assure consistency across the organisation? Because I'm sure we must get some interesting requests.
Yes, and I guess it will very much depend on what the request for the reasonable adjustment pertains to, whether it's around requiring some change to the environment, the learning environment, so that it's suitable for that individual or a piece of equipment, or whether there's a requirement for external education support for the people who are facilitating the learning, so they have a great awareness of how to sensitively and appropriately support people with a particular need. In the main, most of this is addressed within the organisation and with consultation, obviously, with the individual who's highlighting they have an additional.
Okay, thank you. I'm interpreting from the question and answers that the board are content now to approve some question.
Thank you very much. That'll happen today.
Well done, David. A group of state return information collected.
So the fourth layer of bread, the bread, estates return information collection, commonly known as ERIC, annual returns for all sites, which effectively takes significant amount of financial data and estates data collects and reported into NHS on an annual basis. There are 25 sections, 181 questions that are answered. And this was submitted during October for all of the organisations. As the report notes, this is really useful data. It's assessed across NHS and is available on NHS's public website. It's used in things like the model health reports to give us areas of opportunity. It is most valuable where you've got a stable organisation or a stable estate. The report notes that we have obviously had some significant changes over the past number of years, not least a new hospital, insourcing of soft FM services last year, hard year effect insourcing hard FM services at Buff, and similarly soft FM this year at Women's. So there are changes and reasons for variation. Nevertheless, an important piece of work, not least because the report identifies the amount of backlog maintenance that we require to keep our organisations to the standards needed. And you can see there's a significant amount of backlog maintenance that we ongoingly assess as required. So at Luft, that's £57 million, 57.2, Liverpool Women's 9.6, and Liverpool Heart and Chest 11.6 million. Interesting to note that the breakdowns in the report that, as expected, Aintree has the largest amount of backlog maintenance required. But noticeably, the Royal, even though it is a new hospital, at least because of the delayed length of build, is now starting to require backlog maintenance going forward. Overall, the report, there was nothing out of expectation with the information that was collated, and I put it forward to the board. Yeah. It's perhaps worth noting that in the consent agenda, Eric, or the State Infection Control, does have a bedfellow, Pam, the premises assurance model, with the self-assessment questionnaires from the estate's team, and these two pieces of work together really form a key part of planning for the future years and where we prioritise our funding.
Took mischief in your voice in presenting that from. Any points, questions on the stage?
Just going to note, just to note that obviously it's very interesting information, and through the last estates programme, we commissioned a piece of work to look at the look to the estate, obviously across the five of us as well, which draws very heavily on the area concerns from all of the trusts as well. So we're just concluding that work now. We'll take it from the last programme. That clearly shows the opportunities across the five of us for how we use our estate. A huge opportunity. So,
okay. Thank you. Sue, please.
Thanks, well, good question. Table 1 sets out the cost of eradicating significant risk backlog maintenance work of 5.6 million. Has that been accounted for within the budget? Is that reflected in our budget? The significant backlog.
Yeah. So this is where we prioritise spend in this year. Year ahead. So absolutely, that's where we are focusing our backlog maintenance.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Consent received. Thank you very much. Group governance.
So first of all, I'll cover the board assurance framework, which covers 42 from July to September. Obviously, board members will be aware we agreed a set of strategic risks in advance of Liverpool NHS joining the group. That included presentations of NHS at the time, so that we could design them in advance for their joining the group last month. But this period only covers the activities of a Loughton Liverpool women's position. Following the last the Q1 review, where board members asked us to look again at the gaps in the strategic risks, and we've, as board members will see, we've added an additional 9th risk, which relates to quality of care. Obviously, one of the other things that we've done, just to remind people, obviously from an oversight point of view, each of the strategic risks is allocated to an individual owner, but obviously that is discussed as a group of executives as well. And in advance of it coming to the board, they are reviewed by the individual owner and the corporate governance team. And obviously we have discussions as a group executive just to make sure that we have captured all the relevant information, but also that we've done a bit of an assessment of the scoring to say, do they actually stack up together with all the other information that we've got. You would have seen today in the group transformation plan where Tim has referenced the board assurance framework, how we're looking to align the activities in all of our work so that it actually does reflect the strategic risks. The other thing that we've done is last month, board members will be aware, we approved the provider capability assessments for the 3 organisations. Going forward, what we've done is looked at 5 areas of thematic issues in the capability assessment and aligned those to our 9 strategic risks to say, how do we make sure that going forward, the issues that we identified in the capability assessments, we will add to from Q3 into the actions that we need to do in the board assurance frameworks, just to make sure that they're tackled and that they're also visible to say that from the board members that we've actually undertaken. There are no changes actually to the scores during Q2. They remain as they are. We've got one significant risk, which is in relation to financial resilience and sustainability. And obviously, I think Rob's report earlier today would have made that clear why that hasn't changed. And there is still 6 of the other risks remain with the score in the serious category and 2 at moderate. Going forward, the one issue that I just wanted to highlight, the risk appetite statements that we've got are a couple of years old. And the landscape, as we've heard today within the NHS, has changed and continues to become tougher with the regulatory regime and the scrutiny that's given in the oversight framework. What we're proposing to do is during Q4 to do a session with the board again to revisit board risk appetite statements. That will take into account the outcome of the 3-year planning round that is being undertaken at the moment, the board will require to achieve. And hopefully that will set us a set of risk appetite statements that will fit into how our decision making is going forward and where we need to take the risk. Because I think the risk appetite statement at the moment probably would need to change, taking into account the regulatory regime that surrounds us as well. So that's something to look forward to in Q4. I have to take on questions. But obviously, we're looking for the Q2 report to be approved.
Jenny, please.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm just looking at our new risk 9 on quality. We obviously have discussions in our audit and risk committee around the isolated site risk of Liverpool Women's, which as a standalone organisation was its own individual bath risk. And I think looking at some of the detail that sits underneath that risk 9, I would expect to see that articulated in the next iteration.
Yeah, so we've agreed that going forward, David will include that as part of risk 9 in quality.
Thank you. Any other points? The most important. Yeah, Mike.
Thank you. Risk 4, financial resilience and sustainability. Why hasn't the risk score increased? Because the wording is there's a risk of non-delivery of a balanced financial plan. I think that risk has increased in the quarter. And the group's continuing underlying finance deficit will lead to financial constraints and intervention. I think that risk has increased in the quarter as well, and certainly has increased in the subsequent quarter. So why is it not increased, please?
Well, I think it is still as a significant risk. So we've left it at that. I think there are nuances around it. So yes, the environment's got up. Yes, the ask on us has got harsher of the regulatory scrutiny. However, we are saying, and we are putting our best foot forward to say our best case is to deliver the plan. And of course, as I've said, we are on plan at H2. Now, if during the third quarter we start to wobble on that, then that I think would be the time to change it. But it is clearly still as a
the issue with the risk states the difficult one, because the issue with the risk scoring matrix is we'll need a new one soon because there won't be enough numbers in it. So we're sitting here, aren't we, with a likelihood, an inherent likelihood score of 5 out of 5. The controls and things we've got in place at the moment is 4 out of 5. If we were already at 5 out of 5, then we're effectively saying it's game over, aren't we? There's nothing that can further be done. So I think Rob's point about that likelihood score is the key issue here. Are the controls significant enough to manage that likelihood? And you would expect Q3 there would be a tipping point as to whether that ball becomes a 5. But I think if we're at 5 for both now, that would be saying there are no controls in I think on what we're trying to do from the residual score. So there's an auditor nodding down there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's probably at the right level currently. I agree with that. I'll keep that under review going forward. But we're staying at significant. We're aware of the issues. We've put in additional controls. We've got PwC and we have an action plan. So I think it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you. So with the addition of risk 9 and the vault, so I think Jenny's point's been important one about specificity on the isolated site issue in women's services. But that you agree? Thanks for that. Women's hospital unitary governance.
I'll just come back. One of the other issues in the agenda was around the corporate governance manual. That's included within the information pack on 87. Basically, the changes that we've made is obviously with Liverpool Partnerships joining the group, we've updated the corporate governance manual to take into account all of the issues relating to the constitution, the scheme delegation of standard financial instructions, to bring them up to date with the group model, and that's included. We've also changed, obviously, the board members are aware, obviously the governance model to include the Liverpool Partnerships and boardroom side. In terms of the statutory roles, about how do we do statutory roles about responsibilities and accountable officers for the board, but also how that's delegated against each of our statutory organisations. Again, that's been updated to include the officers cover Liverpool Partnerships as a statutory organisation. Just one change to what was in the pack. We've made some changes in the last couple of weeks in relation to the data protection officer for Liverpool Partnerships. That pleasure now goes to myself, as well as being DPO for Loughborough and Liverpool Women. So that's the only change.
Good to know. Thank you.
You want me to pick up the charity?
Yeah, so charitable. Jenny's going to pick up the charitable funds annual report.
Thank you. So that's the annual report, accounts and letter of representation are in the pack. I won't go through them, but hopefully you've read them and seen some of the wonderful stuff that the charity's achieved over the last 12 months and the fantastic pictures that we've managed to get into that report as well. These have been through the Charitable Funds Committee and Audit Committee ahead of coming to board for final approval. They've also been through an independent examination. So the ask is for the board to approve the annual report and accounts and the signing of the letter of representation. which will be submitted to the Charities Commission ahead of the deadline, 31st of January.
Thank you. Consent. Thank you. Vote.
The other issues for Liverpool Women's, we've made some slight changes to the audit committee terms of reference for Liverpool Women's. They're very minor changes in terms of the membership arrangements that we agreed by board members. So this is obviously from a governance point of view, the audit committee terms of reference needs to be approved by the board. And then when we come to the last one, it will be the same arrangement, so I won't repeat it again to items time.
Thank you. So happy with the two? Happy on the terms of reference? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Everyone content? Thank you. Love. Chris?
Thanks, Chair. I'll just take the lost charity annual reports and accounts. Anybody who's read both of them will know ours is not as pretty as the Liverpool Women's one, but we'll fix that for next year. It's been reviewed and scrutinised by charitable funds and the audit committee, so it's just here for the corporate trustee to agree and formalise submission.
David, consent? Unhappy? Thank you. You do better on pictures and formatting next time. Subject that agreed. And then the audit committee points as discussed before. David, thank you. All done. Now we have a number of items in the consent agenda status, which is set out on the agenda: violence prevention and reduction standards, the aforementioned friend of Eric Pan, group governance papers, and then specific women's and law papers. Everyone content? Okay, we've worked a lot of business very efficiently this morning. Everybody's made a good contribution. Some good discussion. Important business to check. So thank you all very much indeed. Are we able to bring all the
Which is outside.
okay, can we and thank you everyone part-time for your interest in our meeting in public today. The board members, if we sit that down in our private session, can we do that in 30 minutes? Thanks very much indeed. Meeting closed. Yeah.